Hey guys, so this will be somewhat of a review of Monday. Obviously, we didn't have the means for you to pull up the unit 3 content so that we could follow along like what we've been doing. So I did the best with what we had. In addition, I posted old videos for you guys as references. So although I'm gonna kind of start from the beginning of Unit 3, I'm not gonna go back in time and re-teach everything, just kind of hit upon the key points and we'll move on from there. So this is our vertebral column. This is our skyscraper. Point of reference, we could make this class a heck of a lot more difficult with just words. I mean, I'm not holding you accountable to all these little tubercles and tuberosities and condyles and Gertie's tubercle. And because to me, that's abstracting to what is so important for my students to understand, and that's movement. All right. Eventually in grad school, you're going to have to learn some of the little bony landmarks and stuff, and that's cool. Do you know when things move and can you see positions and motion? Okay. So I know this may seem like a lot, but it could be a lot worse if we added all these extra new vocabulary words into it. Okay. So vertebral column broken up into parts. And so this is one big skyscraper. We have our cervical, that's our neck, C1 through 7. What separates a C7 from a T1? What did we say on Monday? Ribs, absolutely. You start to get in the ribs. As we work our way down, this should make sense. Every floor, if we start at the top floor of a skyscraper, every floor down has to bear the weight of more stuff on top of it. And that's what's happening here. They're going to get more and more dense and less contributing to movement because they have to bear more stuff on top. Okay? So the thoracic vertebra, rib vertebra, and then eventually we get to the ones that don't have ribs, those are our lumbar. These are going to be much more dense. They got to support all the stuff on top of them. They're going to move, but they won't be as movable as the neck. There's less stuff. All you got to do is hold up a basketball. Eventually, I think this blends in, segue, spectrumalizes. I just made that word up pretty well until eventually you get into vertebral discs that don't move at all, that are fused, the bedrock of which our skyscraper can be built upon. You don't want to build a skyscraper in Delcambre, Louisiana, where I'm from. That ground's too soft. You need solid foundation to build a tall skyscraper. And that's what this is, our sacrum, our fused bedrock vertebra. Now, our sacrum articulates with our iliac, our ilium, and presence this form. Okay? And this forms our pelvic girdle. And then the final one, which is kind of insignificant to how we use it as humans, that's our tailbone, the coccyx. You got 4 fused coccygeal bones. Useless for our class, very important as part of the pelvic girdle. These two are going to combine to what we call trunk, which again makes sense because as we work our way down, we get less and less movement. So we need a lot more contributors to our trunk motion. With only 7 contributors, with only 7 dominoes, we get a heck of a lot of motion. Yes, we got that little specialized one there for the twisties. But with less and less movement, we kind of need much more of them to get significant motion of our trunk. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's why we call it trunk, because I can't differentiate. I can't say, I just want to bend the thoracic slinkies. Like the thoracic and the lumbar are kind of all contributing into lateral, sagittal, and transverse. So that's why we say trunk. All right. So our trunk motion Last bending is frontal. Follows the same rules as the pelvis. We have two different directions and two different planes, right and left lateral and right and left transverse. So that's why we differentiate. We don't just say right and left. We say right, left lateral, which tells us frontal, right and left transverse, which tells us transverse. There is no right and left when it comes to flexion extension. You don't do a front roll to your right or to your left. You do a cartwheel to your right or to your left. You spin to your right or to your left. So trunk flexion, trunk extension, right lateral trunk bend, left lateral trunk bend, right transverse trunk rotation, left transverse trunk rotation, or in layman's terms, right lateral bend, left lateral bend, right transverse spin, left transverse spin. Remember the key points. Cervical, same exact rules. Flexion extension, flexion extension. Right lateral cervical, right lateral trunk. Left lateral cervical, left lateral trunk. Right transverse cervical, right transverse trunk. Left transverse cervical, left transverse trunk. So the rules of motion are the same. Where they happen, that's the only difference. Okay. I got what I tried to give you guys. I tried to give you guys a little X-ray context here. So they separated the thoracic and the lumbar. But for our classes, again, it's going to be a combination because you can't differentiate. But I wanted to just show you what's happening. So because our spine has a natural curve to it, it should make sense that when we go forward, it will actually make the spine more straight because the spine has a natural curve to it when we're in anatomical position. Does that make sense? So when you look at it, you're like, well, whoa, well, look how straight it is when it's flexed. Yeah, because it didn't start straight when you're in anatomical. So this just kind of gives you some X-ray vision to the flexion, the extension, the right and left lateral, and then this bottom one is the twisties. And it's meant to show you, like, it's actually hard to see each individual domino move about itself because it takes a sum total of a bunch to get significant motion. It makes sense. You don't want one vertebra to do that. You have vessels to protect, you got nerves to protect, you got, arteries and nerves to protect. You can have a little bit of motion, but you can't have too much. Okay, it's a fine line. Anybody's ever played with dominoes as a kid? I never played the game dominoes, but I love to stack them up and knock them down. And what you learn early when you're stacking dominoes is I can't stack dominoes and then turn one at a 90-degree angle and make it change direction. You have to gradually change its direction. A little bit here, then a little bit there, then a little bit here, right? Gradually change direction. Now, after several graduals, you made a 90-degree turn. That's what this is. It's a bunch of graduals. It's not like one vertebra does that. Okay? So that's what these X-rays are meant, is just to kind of show you what's happening on the inside. I think you can see the thoracic motion, which you should. The lumbar doesn't have a lot of motion. The thoracic has more because it's higher on top. The higher we get, the more movement we get. You can actually see the spinous processes spiraling around on the bottom photo. Like you can almost see it like a spiral staircase of the spinous processes. Transverse processes. All right, here's our basic motion. Flexion gets us in the fetal, extension gets us out of fetal. I think it's important for the book befores and afters to not fall into the trap of seeing just this start and saying, why isn't that right lateral? That's just a start position. So we're just trying to give you like a full range of motion. So in other words, if I start bent to the right and I go all the way to the left, I had a full range of motion of left lateral left lateral to anatomical left lateral from. Right lateral to right lateral from. If you wish, this is what's great about educational options. If this full range of motion doesn't work for you, then just make your own. Do like a here to there, right lateral from, here to there, left lateral to, here to there, left lateral from, here to there. Like you can chop it up if you wish, okay? Let's get to the transverse. So on Monday, I talked to you about landmarks that work. Chin, ears, sternum, shoulders, okay? Chin to chest, or sternum to pubis. So for the transverse, I wanted to emphasize this one today because it's not emphasized in one of the posted videos from last classes. What you really want to pay attention to, we talked about it on Monday, sternum and pubis in terms of lining up in anatomical position, lined up. When I twist my trunk to the right, I don't rotate my pelvis, my pubis is still facing front of the class, but now my sternum's facing to the right of the class. They're not lined up anymore. Does that make sense? Because they're twisted. Twist to the left, pubis still looking at the middle of the class. Now my sternum's looking to the left of the class. So what happened is, this is what happened to my trunk. It got rotated. Does that make sense? Okay. And we talked about the illusions, how sternum and pubis line up. Sternum looks to my right. That's right transverse trunk rotation, right transverse spin. But I get the same spin if my sternum stays looking at the class and my pelvis looks to its left, because my sternum is still now looking at my right. It's the destination. It's you started here, you ended there. You had to have the same motion. Notice I didn't say left transverse pelvic. If we're talking about the trunk, this is left transverse pelvic, but it's right transverse trunk. Hey, trunk, how does you have to rotate to go back home to line up with the pubis? No problem. I have to spin to my left to go back home. That meant my trunk had to spin to the right. Non-traditionally, it doesn't look like it. That's okay. Does everybody understand that concept? You know where you start? Now you know I'm serious. You know where you start? Twist to the right. You saw how my shirt, there was obliquity, there was angles in my shirt. It's because my trunk's rotating. If my trunk didn't rotate, you would see no angulation in my shirt. Says, see that? Okay. So from here to here is the same angle of my shirt as from here to there. Same thing. Okay. Now, landmarks. Chin, sternum are the two transverse landmarks that I use to teach cervical rotation. Ears to shoulder is how I teach lateral. Sternum and chin is how I also teach sagittal. So for review for Monday, chin closer to chest, flexion, Now, some of you may be like, why don't you just say angles? Because again, angles can be posterior or anterior, and angles can change as we move reference points. So I like to use landmarks because there is no in the back, my chin. My chin is always right here, right? My sternum is always right there. So there's no decreasing the back, but I got to increase the front. And if I decrease the front, I got to increase the back. This is my chin. Chin to chest gets me more in the fetal, cervical flexion. Chin away from chest gets me further away from fetal, cervical extension. Right ear, right shoulder, right lateral cervical bending, left ear, left shoulder, left lateral cervical bending. And then here's the twisties. Okay? Chin, chest, chin looks to the right, right transverse cervical rotation. However, I get the same twist of my cervical spine when this happens. Something is spinning to the left globally, and your instinct wants to say left transverse spin of whatever it is. And I'm here, this is what our 100th example of this illusion, right? I'm here to tell you it's where you start and where you finish is what counts. All the other stuff is illusion. What shoulder am I looking at? My right or my left? My right. The only way that can happen is if I twist my neck to the right. And I could either do it at the top or I could do it at the bottom. Just like with the slinky. I could bend the slinky like this, or I could bend the slinky like this. I still get the same bend. Right transverse cervical, right transverse cervical. Left transverse cervical, left transverse cervical. It sounds like a Mozart song. Left transverse cervical. Don't ever be good. Y'all weren't like recording that. It's good. All right, back to reality. So, chin, chest, sternum, pubis. The hardest part of this lecture is, you remember this old country singer who passed away called Kenny Rogers? Anybody know Kenny Rogers? Cool fact about Kenny Rogers, he was the first act ever at the Cajun Dome. Back in like 1985 or so. I wasn't there, but my mom and dad were there. You got to know when to hold them. That guy. Why did I just bring up Kenny Rogers? Yeah. Here's the lesson. You're going to have to know when motion is pelvis to hip. You have to know when the motion is just trunk. You have to know when the motion is just cervical. And you have to know when it's a combination of any and all. I'll give you an example. I'm putting my arms out to emphasize the rotation, okay? So it's not like hey man, it's that. Okay? I'm just trying to emphasize the rotation. We're going to do some yes or no questions. Did my neck or cervical vertebra move? Good. Do you see how somebody would want to say it didn't? What do you mean it didn't move? You were looking straight, now you're looking to your left. Students trained in the art of Kambojitsu understand that you didn't move your neck, something else moved, and the neck and the eyes went along for the ride. You know, when I'm traveling in a car, I'm not literally running down the interstate. I'm just going along for the ride. Okay, what about this? Did the cervical move? Yes. How so? Right transverse. Good. Did the trunk move? Let's do it again. Okay, and I go slow because I'm really trying to either move or not move. It's tough when you get lower. No, good. It did not. Think of it like this: 4 points of analysis. 1, 2, 3, 4, like a box. If my trunk rotated, those 4 points wouldn't line up anymore. Does that make sense? But when I did this, 1, 2, 3, 4, they still lined up. So what was the motion? Left transverse pelvic girdle rotation, left hip internal, right hip external, and then right transverse cervical rotation to keep my eyes looking level. Let's try this one. Ask you a series of questions. Let's make sure we get the motion first. Cervical. One of you guys is right. Cervical.
Yes.
Yes. If so, how? Right transverse. Trunk.
Yes.
Yes. If so, how? Left transverse. Pelvic girdle. No. It may seem like a lot. That's okay. Education can be a lot. That's why we practice. That's why we practice. The goal is for you guys eventually to be able to see what's pelvis, what's trunk, and or what's cervical. And the key to seeing these things, in my opinion, is the landmarks. If I would have done this and my chin would have stayed lined up with my sternum, but my shoulders rotated about my iliac spines, you'd have been like, oh, that was just left transverse trunk rotation. If I'd have kept my head straight, oh, that was right transverse cervical rotation. If I rotate the pelvis, you're going to see the pelvis. You're going to see the pubis. But if the pelvis doesn't rotate, trunk. Left transverse trunk, no cervical. Right transverse trunk, left transverse cervical. Because if I didn't move my neck, it would go along for the ride. Any questions so far? Yes, ma'am.
The language said chin, sternum, ears, chest, right?
And some of the landmarks will be more optimal in different planes. So ears and shoulders are great for lateral reference. I like to use chin and sternum for sagittal reference and transverse reference. That's my preference. You could use ears and shoulders for transverse, but it's a little weird because one ear is going to come forward, the other ear is going to reference each other. So it's like I kind of look at it at 3 dimensions. When I'm here, like these are 2 things break. That's why I like to look here. Or here to there is a break just as much as here to here is. Does that make sense? It's the same as. So basically what we're doing is we're just leveling up or down based on how you want to look at it. Our chin becomes our sternum, and our pubis becomes our chin becomes sternum. Sternum becomes chin, pubis becomes sternum, but it's the same concept. Make sense? It's like if they were connected here and I twisted to the right, they would disconnect. And ears and shoulders would now be shoulders and ilium. Right shoulder, right ilium, or right hip, however you want to look at it. The pelvic motion, I have some examples here in the book, but I want to get to some more practical ones on the internet. So you can tell that the pelvis is tilted or rotated to its left. Does that make sense? Like pouring water out the left side here. You guys see that? Like that's my start. So the trunk has to recurve back to its right. Think of it like this. Now I'm doing a start and then I'll do the finish. But if the pelvis is left lateral, you can actually do this in your seat if you wish. Put your weight on your left leg and tilt your pelvis to your left. And if you want to stay upright, your spine has to curve back to the right. It's a compensation. Because if it didn't, your whole body would tilt over to the left and then you'd knock your neighbor on the side of it. So to keep your shoulders and stuff more over your center of mass or over your seat, you're going to bend the trunk back to the right while the pelvis is trying to bend everything to its left. Does that make sense? So if your pelvis starts here and you do this, that would be right lateral pelvic girdle rotation. But your trunk went from bending back to the right to bending back to the left. So that would be left lateral trunk bend. Using our clues. When I'm here, right shoulder is closer to my right hip. Now, I may not have moved the shoulder to the hip, but you know what I did do? Move the hip to the shoulder. These things are closer when I started. And now these things are closer. That's how I know I had to have left lateral. These are closer, and now these are closer. I think I have, on the video I'll post it, I have some chalkboard illustrations of that concept as well, if you're struggling to see it. Okay, transverse, let's use some landmarks, sternum and pubis. So if she were, this is Allie. Allie's married to Ethan Smorgasbord. I always get Ethan's name mixed up. Great people. Been knowing him for a long time. If she was here, sternum and pubis lined up, notice her sternum is looking at her left hip. Does that make sense? So her pelvis must have spun to the right to get her in that position, but her trunk had to spin to its left. There's no other way. Hey, trunk, go home. Sure, no problem. I got to spin to my right to go back to where I started. I had to spin to my left to get to where I'm at. Make sense? So she starts with her trunk twisted to its left. And she ends with her trunk twisted to its right. And unless you are schooled in the arts of looking for these things, we surveyed 100 people, they may say the trunk's not twisted at all. Because in their mind, the only way to twist the trunk is to do the old-fashioned. Does that make sense? We did this on Monday. Your chair swivel, and it's a great way to kind of look at this concept where, depending on where the metal pole is, you can twist your pelvis to the left, and you notice your sternum is looking at your right. Or you can twist your pelvis to the right, And if you notice, your sternum is now looking at the left. Let's do a practice. Don't answer it right away, because I want everybody to give some thought. We're going to go starting top left. That's our start position. There's no rules that say we have to start in anatomical. We could start wherever we want to analyze. So we're going to start top left, and then we're going to work our way down to the bottom right. And I would like for you to tell me the motion at the pelvis and the trunk. I'm telling you there's pelvic girdle rotation, and I'm also telling you there's trunk rotation. So let's see if we can figure out with clues which one is that. Don't answer it out loud. You can whisper and talk to your neighbors, but I want everybody to have a chance to do this. All very good cloud. So we need to do one from the minus. There's more just that if else we say that. I'm saying the reason why a lot more people don't like that for now I hear these in the field showing loud, so it's like a true sway, loud sway. All right, guys. We got to move because we plan on celebrating Halloween, so we gotta move. I already have my costume picked out. It's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna be a Delcom biomechanics professor. Be awesome. Kermit the Frog here. So, let's try to use layman's terms. How, first of all, is her trunk twisted? Is it rotated in the top level? Awesome. That's great. Now, twisted to her right, or is it twisted to her left? Her right, that's correct. Her sternum is looking at her right hip. And the only way that can happen is if you twist it to the right so that you can see the right hip. Does that make sense? Now, I'm not saying she twisted it traditionally. I'm saying she twisted it non-traditionally. She brought the right hip across to visit the sternum, not the sternum to go visit the right hip. So far, so good. So we start off in a right twisted or a right transverse trunk rotated for the long version position. And then we move in the middle and then we keep going down. And I'm going to ask myself the same question. Well, how is she twisted now? Well, she's no longer twisted to her right. She's now twisted to her left. Does that make sense? And so the third step is, well, how does your body go? How did your trunk go from being right rotated to left rotated? Left transverse trunk rotation gets you there. That's the only way that I could go from being twisted to my right to twisted to my left, is to have left transverse trunk rotation. Now, again, it's an illusion because her trunk is twisting kind of from the bottom up instead of the top down. But that's what's happening. So the pelvic girdle rotation is right transverse pelvic girdle rotation. But the trunk rotation is actually to the left. And those things have to happen. Guys, think of it like this. How many of you follow MMA? A little bit? Okay. My major professor at Auburn, she was a 4th degree black belt in Whoopamabutsu, right? And she taught women's safety and defense classes. And guess who was her beta? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Paid my dues. But one thing she used to say in class, because she used a lot of martial arts examples, and it's so simple, but it could be applied here as well. If I'm trying to throw a jab, it's the most accurate punch in MMA, boxing. And the reason it's accurate is because I cancel out 2 different things that are trying to make me not accurate. Meaning the elbow extension is actually trying to take my fist away from the person's face. And the shoulder horizontal adduction is trying to do the same thing. But when I do them together, they cancel out rotation and they summate their translation to make my hand go straight. If you didn't understand what I just said, let me show you how silly it would look if I did both of those motions one at a time in sequence. Or I'll do shoulder first. But when you do them at the same time, it goes straight. So you have to think of it like this. If my pelvis is trying to spin me to the right and everything goes along for the ride, there's no way my arms are going to be able to stay on the ground. The only way my arms and my upper body can stay on the ground is if my pelvis rotates to the right and my trunk counters that by spinning to the left. Because if both my trunk and my pelvis spun to the right, I'd be facing a whole new direction. It'd be like flipping a lamb, a whole new world. The only way I could stay facing the same direction is if one rotates one way while the other rotates the other way to cancel out. Does that make sense? Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Did you say about the middle is not?
Oh, yeah, you're right. The middle would not be twisted at all. The middle, so here's my analogy. A range of motion is road on interstate. Anatomical is Lafayette. We started off in Crowley, top left, and we just traveled straight through to Breaux Bridge, and we passed through Lafayette. Or we could use better verbiage. That was just an analogy. We could say left transverse trunk rotation to, and then left transverse trunk rotation from.
So the middle. That's not it, correct?
For the rotation of the trunk.
Okay, just, okay. That makes sense.
Remember, my elbow can be an anatomical even though my shoulder is not. So my spine can be not spun even though other things are not. My spine can actually be flexed, but it's not twisted. It's a lot twisted. You're very welcome. What a great question. Let me do this example. Not now. All right, guys, this one. Is the trunk rotated on the picture on the left? Yeah. Can you see how so many people would say, no way? What do you mean it's twisted? The arms are on the ground. The sternum's looking straight. You have to be twisted. How is it twisted?
And how is the right?
How is it twisted?
Right.
Yeah. Switch it to the right. And listen, if all the extra syllables mess with you, keep it simple. Is it twisted to the right or twisted to the left? And then fill in right transverse, cervically rotated, all good. Just keep it simple. My sternum is not lined up with the pubis here. The pubis is looking that way, and the sternum is looking this way. And the only way for that to happen is this. That make sense? I'm calling signals on a football. If he lowers the foam, if he lowers it down from this position, what would be the pelvic girdle rotation? Left transverse, outstanding. Does everybody see the pelvic girdle rotation would be left transverse? Perspective. How's the pelvis spinning? Hey, pelvis, what do you see? Pelvis is like, I'm spinning to my left. How is the trunk rotating? To the right. Pelvis would spin to the left, lowering it down. The trunk would twist more to the right. Make sense? The last analogy on this. If, try not to make an idiot of myself. If the trunk didn't move at all and the pelvis were to spin globally, this is what would happen. The trunk has to twist or rotate to the right to keep the arms on the ground. Now, my range of motion is, pardon my horrible language, crap. So I can't keep my shoulder on the ground. But that's what it's trying to do. As the pelvis is trying to bring my whole body to the left, my trunk is going to spin back to the right if this is the position I want to maintain. Does that make better sense? Okay. Was today a good day? Watch, I want to see a kip up. Not today, Satan. All right, guys, y'all have a good one.